Karen Henderson was known throughout Willow Creek Estates as the Queen of Complaints, the undefeated champion of HOA conflicts, and the self-appointed watchdog of neighborhood decorum. Her neighbors had learned, often painfully, that any deviation from the HOA rules would provoke her signature mixture of outrage and over-the-top escalation. But this Saturday morning, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands in a way no one had anticipated. She was hosting a garage sale. From the outside, Karen's lawn looked immaculate. As always, her flowers were perfectly aligned in symmetrical rows, and her driveway was spotless, as if ready for a magazine photo shoot. But behind that pristine facade, a frenzy of activity was taking place. Tables were being dragged out, boxes were being unpacked, and piles of miscellaneous items, some barely recognizable as household goods, were arranged in what she proudly called her community benefit sale. What Karen failed to consider, however, was the HOA rulebook she had memorized cover to cover. Hosting any sale without prior approval was strictly forbidden. In her mind, rules were only relevant when others broke them. By mid-morning, neighbors began to notice the unusual activity. Cars started pulling into her driveway, cautious at first, and then more boldly as curiosity took over. Karen's garage sale was officially underway, and the sheer audacity of it sent whispers through the community like wildfire. Some neighbors were secretly amused, others were annoyed, and a few were quietly plotting. It wasn't often that Karen gave them an opening like this, a rare moment where the neighborhood's collective sense of justice could be exercised with creativity and style. As the first hour passed, Karen strutted up and down her driveway, checking on her customers, beaming with pride. She had meticulously priced every item, assigning random numbers that only made sense to her. A set of old mugs was $15, a single, chipped vase went for $20, and a stack of used magazines sat innocently for $10 each. The logic behind these prices was irrelevant. What mattered was Karen's control over the situation, her perceived triumph over the HOA's mundane rules. Meanwhile, whispers started spreading to other parts of the neighborhood. The Johnsons across the street were the first to act. They had endured countless Karen confrontations, over mailboxes, over hedges, over lawn ornaments, and finally recognized an opportunity for some payback. They began observing, noting the placement of signs, the arrangement of items, and the flow of traffic. By the time the coffee hour ended at the neighborhood clubhouse, an unofficial strike team had been formed. Their mission, to teach Karen a lesson, but in a way that was creative, public, and absolutely viral-worthy. The first signs of subtle chaos appeared just after noon. A misplaced "for sale" sign on Karen's front lawn mysteriously ended up in her neighbor's yard. The box of inexpensive trinkets she had prominently displayed was rearranged in a way that made the prices hilariously confusing, with notes suggesting she was offering one free item per complaint filed. It was harmless, it was cheeky, but it was enough to plant the seeds of doubt in Karen's mind. She had always prided herself on control, yet the first cracks were beginning to show. By the afternoon, foot traffic had increased, drawing attention from the more distant parts of the community. Some visitors were curious about the sale, some were genuinely looking for bargains, but most were there for the spectacle. Karen, oblivious to the brewing neighborhood counterplay, continued to oversee her empire of bargains, waving hands at passing cars and offering dramatic commentary on each item. Her grandiose gestures attracted a small crowd, and the irony of it all was not lost on the HOA veterans watching from their windows. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the unspoken tension escalated. Karen's confidence was met with a series of small disruptions. Garden gnomes mysteriously repositioned, price tags mysteriously switched, and the occasional lost item that later reappeared in someone else's yard. These minor sabotages, orchestrated with a playful sense of irony, were harmless in isolation, but their cumulative effect was undeniable. The narrative of control had shifted. Karen, who believed herself untouchable in her HOA domain, began to feel the first pricklings of uncertainty. The day was far from over, and the garage sale, intended as a display of power and personal victory, was beginning to unravel. Every step Karen took was shadowed by invisible eyes, every movement subtly redirected by the unseen hands of her neighbors. It was a dance of escalation, a slow-motion spectacle of neighborhood politics and human creativity. Karen thought she was the director, but in reality, she had become an unwitting performer in a drama scripted by the very people she had spent years antagonizing. By late afternoon, the story of the unauthorized garage sale had spread beyond her street. Social media posts circulated in private neighborhood groups, pictures of mismatched items and comically rearranged tables garnering chuckles and commentary. Karen's aura of control, once unshakable, was now punctuated with growing confusion. And while she remained outwardly confident, the subtle chaos planted the first seeds of what was shaping up to be the most memorable HOA confrontation in Willow Creek Estates history. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Karen glanced around her driveway, oblivious to the fact that this seemingly simple act of defiance, one unauthorized garage sale, had ignited a chain reaction. What had begun as a personal assertion of independence from the HOA's rules had now become a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. She had no idea that her neighbor's quiet mischief was just the opening act. The day was ending, but the real drama was only just beginning. The next morning, Willow Creek Estates woke to a quiet tension that hung over the street like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Karen, despite the subtle chaos of the previous day, was already outside, inspecting her driveway and adjusting the tables and items she had set up for the extended sale. Her confidence seemed unshakable at first glance, but there was a flicker in her eyes, an instinctive unease. Something about the rearranged gnomes, the switched price tags, and the mysterious complaint-free gift notes had unsettled her, though she refused to admit it even to herself. Meanwhile, her neighbors were hard at work. The Johnsons had organized a coalition of subtle, but highly effective tactical mischief. They knew that Karen thrived on attention and that her sense of control was fragile when challenged in unconventional ways. Their goal was clear: escalate the garage sale saga in a way that would leave Karen flustered, embarrassed, and ultimately humbled, all without breaking a single HOA rule themselves. By mid-morning, the first wave of organized chaos began. A strategically placed, oversized for sale sign appeared at the end of Karen's driveway, proclaiming in bold letters, "Everything must go. HOA secrets inside." The sign was accompanied by a small display of gag items, an empty coffee mug labeled Karen's Anger Therapy, and a dusty old garden shovel tagged as Neighborhood Peace Tool. It was absurd, hilarious, and completely designed to provoke. Neighbors passing by could barely contain their laughter. Karen, however, stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the sign. Her hand went to her forehead, a gesture of disbelief. She hurried outside, scanning the street for any unauthorized interference, but no culprit was in sight. While Karen was momentarily distracted, a subtle escalation unfolded on her tables. A neighbor, armed with nothing but a sense of humor and some stealth, began rearranging items into absurd, illogical groupings. Plates were stacked on top of shoes, mismatched socks were paired with teacups, and books were meticulously alphabetized not by title or author, but by perceived irritation level of the characters in their stories. Each adjustment was carefully done to frustrate Karen's obsessive need for order, and each tiny act brought hidden satisfaction to the onlooking neighbors. By late morning, word had spread further. A small crowd gathered on the sidewalk, curious about the spectacle unfolding on Karen's driveway. Some were longtime residents. Others were new neighbors who had only heard tales of Karen's notorious HOA battles. Phones emerged, cameras clicked, and the scene began to resemble a staged reality show more than a garage sale. Karen, realizing the growing audience, attempted to assert control by repricing items and shuffling tables, but her efforts were immediately undermined by subtle, almost invisible changes. An item would mysteriously disappear for a few minutes, only to reappear elsewhere, or price tags would inexplicably shift by a few dollars, creating tiny pockets of chaos. The true masterpiece of the neighborhood's counter-strategy came in the afternoon, when they introduced what would later be referred to, jokingly, as the Karen Maze. Using tape, small cones, and a few borrowed traffic barriers, they created a winding path through the tables and items, forcing anyone visiting the garage sale to navigate a ridiculous, serpentine obstacle course. Signs along the path included cheeky commentary: "Step carefully, Karen's wrath may strike at any moment, and beware of unauthorized purchases. Karen's face turned red as she tried to maintain her authority, but with every frustrated attempt to straighten the path, the neighbors secretly adjusted the layout again, creating a never-ending loop of confusion as if the maze weren't enough. Someone, who would later be revealed as the Johnsons' secret digital agent, uploaded a live video of Karen's garage sale to the neighborhood's social media group. The post went viral within hours. Screenshots, GIFs, and clips showing Karen's increasingly flustered reactions were shared widely. The video's caption read, "When Karen tries to break HOA rules, and the HOA fights back." The footage spread beyond Willow Creek Estates, attracting views, likes, and comments from viewers who had never met Karen but were already forming opinions about her infamous antics. By mid-afternoon, Karen's sense of control had been completely eroded. Every action she attempted, straightening a table, repositioning an item, or addressing a visitor, was met with subtle resistance or clever sabotage. Neighbors were careful not to break any laws or HOA rules themselves, but their ingenuity created an environment that left Karen spiraling. Her signature outrage was still present, but now it was mixed with confusion, embarrassment, and frustration. The garage sale, meant to demonstrate her personal authority, had become a public spectacle of her unraveling. In the final hours of the day, a new level of chaos emerged. Balloons were attached to certain items, each labeled with mysterious and often sarcastic messages: free karma points, buy one, complain twice, and HOA compliance not included. Even the smallest details, the placement of a broom, the strategic leaning of a garden gnome, were manipulated to maximize comedic effect while subtly humiliating Karen. Neighbors watched from windows and porches, giggling quietly as Karen's frustration mounted, her perfectly curated facade cracking with each passing minute. By sunset, Karen's garage sale was both a personal defeat and a community spectacle. She had attempted to assert dominance over the rules, but the neighbors had turned her own event into a masterclass of playful retribution. Her pride was wounded, her confidence shaken, and the reputation she had carefully built as the neighborhood's self-appointed authority was temporarily tarnished. Yet, despite the chaos, Karen refused to admit defeat. She vowed, silently and furiously, that this would not be the final chapter. The garage sale was over for now, but the battle lines had been drawn, and the stage was set for the ultimate confrontation. The morning after the infamous garage sale, Willow Creek Estates awoke to a quiet sense of anticipation. Karen Henderson, undeterred by the previous day's chaos, had spent the night plotting her revenge. In her mind, the neighborhood had humiliated her, undermined her authority, and transformed her garage sale into a public spectacle of embarrassment. But Karen was nothing if not relentless, and she refused to allow a few clever neighbors to dictate the terms of engagement. Today, she would take control. Karen's plan, however, was ambitious in ways that were almost comically over-engineered. She had consulted the HOA rulebook extensively, scrutinized every regulation, and prepared what she confidently believed was a foolproof strategy to reclaim her dominance. Tables were rearranged into precise grids, signage was standardized and color-coded, and each item was meticulously labeled. There was even a schedule printed out for visitor flow, instructing attendees on which path to take at what time, and in what order they could browse her curated collection of fine household goods. Karen believed this would restore order, awe her neighbors, and reassert her control. But as she stepped outside, she quickly realized the neighborhood had anticipated her return. The Johnsons and their coalition had been quietly plotting overnight, determined to escalate the spectacle to its peak. When Karen opened her driveway, she was confronted with a scene that left her momentarily speechless. Every table was gone, replaced by a labyrinth of garden hoses, caution tape, and strategically positioned lawn ornaments. Signs had multiplied exponentially, each more sarcastic than the last, with messages like, "Karen's revenge sale caution," "Obey at your own risk," and "Step carefully." HOA ethics in progress. Karen attempted to reclaim the tables, moving them back into place one by one, but every adjustment was met with subtle sabotage. A neighbor would appear from nowhere to accidentally bump a table. A cleverly concealed rake would tip over a pile of carefully stacked items, or a garden gnome would mysteriously fall into the path of her meticulously mapped visitor flow. The cumulative effect was chaotic, humorous, and thoroughly demoralizing. Karen's meticulous preparation, which she had hoped would guarantee victory, had instead become the canvas for the neighborhood's playful creativity. By mid-morning, the situation escalated further. The Johnsons had recruited a small troop of neighbors armed with cameras and smartphones. They began documenting Karen's every move, capturing moments of frustration, overcorrection, and minor mishaps. The live feed was posted to the neighborhood's social media page, attracting an audience far beyond Willow Creek Estates. Within hours, the video was being shared with captions like, "Watch Karen try to reclaim control, fails spectacularly," and "HOA Queen meets her match. Neighbors strike back." Karen, furious, tried to demand the videos be removed, but the HOA rules made it impossible to prevent public sharing of events occurring on her own property once they were witnessed by others. The neighbors' mischief continued throughout the day. Balloons were tied to her doorknobs, chairs were positioned in inconvenient angles, and small, harmless pranks, like switching price tags between absurdly expensive items and cheap knickknacks, added to Karen's growing frustration. Every attempt at correction was undermined with precision. Even her curated path through the garage sale was compromised when strategically placed obstacles forced visitors to meander in ways she had never intended. The labyrinth had become an interactive comedy for the entire block as the sun climbed higher. Karen's confidence eroded completely. Her carefully planned revenge had backfired spectacularly. Each step she took was met with either invisible resistance or visible mockery. Even the small children of the neighborhood seemed to join the effort, giggling as they rearranged lightweight items and redirected curious visitors. Karen's fury was palpable, yet the humor of the situation was undeniable. She had set out to dominate, but she had become the star of her own public embarrassment. By late afternoon, the climax of the saga unfolded. The Johnsons unveiled the piece de resistance, a makeshift stage at the far end of Karen's driveway, decorated with banners reading, "HOA rules are forever, Karen's Compliance School." Volunteers dressed in comically oversized HOA official outfits staged mock inspections of Karen's sale, checking labels, measuring table spacing, and correcting violations with exaggerated gestures. The neighbors, who had once tiptoed around rules to maintain plausible deniability, now openly celebrated the playful overthrow of Karen's authority. Karen's protests, muttered under her breath, were drowned out by the laughter and applause of onlookers as the evening approached. Karen finally conceded, though not gracefully. Her pride was bruised, her ego battered, and her legendary aura of control tarnished. The garage sale, which had begun as an unauthorized act of personal triumph, had been transformed into a public spectacle of collective creativity and playful retribution. The neighborhood had turned what was meant to be Karen's victory into a story that would be told, remembered, and shared for years. By sunset, Willow Creek Estates returned to its quiet, suburban rhythm. Karen retreated inside, plotting her next move in secret, while her neighbors celebrated their success in subtle ways. A shared potluck, casual storytelling on porches, and private laughter at the day's events. The garage sale was over, but the legend of Karen's epic defeat and the neighborhood's clever countermeasures would live on. A cautionary tale of hubris, community ingenuity, and the unpredictable power of collective mischief. And while Karen swore that the next HOA gathering would be her redemption, one thing was certain. The neighborhood had tasted victory, and Willow Creek Estates would never forget the day that Karen's garage sale scandal became the stuff of local legend.